are developmental, which ones that we can win with, which ones are going to, move forward with. I think that'll be the number one thing. And then once we get there, then we'll start evaluating systems and plays. And, obviously if there's some coaching things that'll be high on the list. So, just normal stuff.
All right. That was Mike Zimmer talking about his offseason checklist. This is Purple Daily. Phil Mackey, Judd Zulgad, Declan Goff producing, and our friend from ESPN.com, Vikings reporter, insider, Courtney Cronin. Courtney, how long did it take you to remove your jaw from the floor in surprise when you saw that Marwan Maloof's contract renewed going into 2021?
Not very long. I mean, this was kind of the foregone conclusion. So he signed a 2-year deal when he came on in January 2019, replacing Mike Priefer when Prief went to join Kevin Stefanski, or going to join Freddie Kitchens at the time, and the Browns. And obviously Stefanski, knowing him from here, and how well the special teams unit was in Cleveland in 2019, retained him. So Maloof has been here for 2 seasons. Dan Bailey struggled down the stretch. He missed, I think 9 kicks in his final 5 games, something like that. He finished the season with a bunch of misses, most in the NFL. That was kind of expected, I think, at this point, just because it was not a good year for Dan Bailey. It just wasn't. And that falls on the special teams coordinator. But before that, there were a lot of coverage issues that Mike Zimmer saw. On punt and kickoff return, they weren't explosive in those areas. I think Chad Beebe's 11-yard return this past week was one of the longest that they had. And that one came in the first quarter of the Detroit game. So, I mean, pretty damning stuff just for a unit that, for so long was, pretty explosive, but not surprised in the slightest. It's just, who are you going to find to replace Maloof? I mean, Mike Zimmer had a lot of stability under Mike Priefer for a number of years. Priefer was here before Zimmer got here. So if he's trying to find that sort of stability, that's not easy in the NFL. And, kickers are going to go through struggles. Dan Bailey was a really good kicker early on this season and then kind of had a meltdown the final month, and he was dealing with a back injury. To Zimmer's credit, he never threw the kicker under the bus the way he had in previous years. He handled it, I think, as well as he could have, but it was a business decision. And I think that for a long time, it kind of felt like a foregone conclusion that Maloof was not going to be back. Now we're going to have to wait a couple months to see, will Bailey be back too? Will it be a kicking competition? I think the smart thing to do would be, keep him throughout OTAs, keep him throughout mini camp, training camp, have a kicking competition, and then go from there, because the guy just signed a 3-year contract last March. And so it's, you can save a little bit against the cap if you want to release him eventually. It's not much. It's just under $2 million. But, there is, the thought in my mind that you're not going to just cut bait with him right away. You're probably going to want to at least see, hey, did he work through whatever he needed to work through this offseason? Is the new special teams coordinator going to be able to help him, things like that. But yeah, it's, we got one coaching move down and we're going to be waiting on another one, it feels like, for a little bit.
So I was going to say, on potential move number 2 in Kubiak, what's the timetable there? And do you buy that Gary is actually going to go home and decompress and think about the future? Or do you think a decision's been made and Zim is desperately trying to say, no, come back, and Kubes is going to say, look, dude, I've had health problems. I'm rich. I've got farmland in Texas. It's been fun, but see ya.
Yeah, I think, the thought from Zimmer, at least the way that he came across in his season-ending press conference, is that he wants to give Gary as much time as he wants to be able to think this one through, praying that he comes back. Last year, remember, he was kind of in that same spot. Is Kubiak going to come back after Stefanski took the Browns job? What are they going to do with that position? And it was kind of like a plea, please, Gary, come back. Now this year, I mean, he cited some of the health issues that Gary's had, just kind of the mental and physical toll that this season took on all the coaches. I think Zimmer's going through that too. So at this point, he's not willing to dabble in any of the what ifs about, who'd replace him, what that would look like. But I think the thing here is that whether it's Kubiak or if it's somebody else, that scheme is not changing. So that really limits the pool in today's NFL of the candidates that you would bring in that you would expect to work. Because Zimmer's been through this. This would be his 6th offensive coordinator in 6 years. And it's not saying that, all of them have been because of a bucking of heads between the head coach and the offensive coordinator. That happened a couple times, but, to our knowledge, that never happened with him and Gary. I think Gary, if he retires, it will be because he's worn the hell out and he's done this for a long time. And that, this season wasn't just okay, get back up in the booth and call plays and it'll be like it was a couple years ago. I mean, offenses have changed in the 4 years since Gary had done this as a primary play caller before, and he had to adapt. And, there are moments that you wonder, okay, is he a little bit behind the fastball here? And then there's other moments where, they finish with, the 4th in total offense, 11th in points this year. Mike Zimmer calls it his most explosive offense that he's had in Minnesota in 7 years, which I think there's certainly truth to that, but they have had other explosive offenses before. I just think that this scheme fit what he wanted to do as a head coach the best, and that's what he wants to continue going forward. But to circle back, as far as a timeline, I feel like, we're still in the very early stages of the offseason. They could take a couple of weeks for this. I mean, remember last year, the staff wasn't even set until the middle of February with all of the offensive changes that they had. So that's kind of where things are at the moment.
Courtney, I love the Zimmer quote because it makes perfect sense in his mind. In his mind, seeing Dalvin break runs is explosive. And this is why if Gary resigns on a couple fronts, one from a schematic standpoint of things aren't going to change, but if I am a potential up and coming OC, I'm not getting near this place because I really believe at the end of the day, post bye week, what we saw was a combination of what Gary likes to do and what Gary can do. Mm-hmm. And Gary's very good at what Gary does, but also how Mike likes to influence things.
Yeah.
So I buy that Zimmer sees this as my most explosive offense and it was great. And the rest of us take a step back and are like, really? That's the most explosive offense for a team that's Justin Jefferson? I don't think so.
I know. I get what you're saying. And, I think it's very clear. Like, here's the quote. I'll read it to you about what he said, about like, let's wait and see what happens. Then we can figure out all that stuff out. But I will say this. I love the scheme that we're running offensively. I love the wide zone offense. I love the play action passes, all those things. A coach told me one time that your offense should be what your quarterback is best at. And that's what I feel Kirk is best at. Those kind of things are what make him really good. So to me, that's really important. There's nothing he said there that's wrong at all. That is what Kirk is really good at. He's a terrific play action quarterback. And when he's supported by a very strong run game, you can bring the best out of him. Well, you can still, like, the scheme's not broken. I truly believe that it's not broken at all. It's just you can add other elements to it to make it even more explosive. If you really want to bring out the best in Kirk Cousins, because we saw a very good Kirk this year at the end of the season. He finished with a career high 35 touchdowns thrown after throwing 10 interceptions in his first 6 games. The turnaround was there. You figured out what worked post bye week by leaning heavily on your running back. But you can also improve the offensive line. Like, you can really, really do that. And it's just, it's a matter of truly committing to it and not, letting people in the front office, make decisions of, I see a pass rusher, or other shiny objects that are not a guard. That's not a sexy pick for them. So, but it's a necessary one if you want to bring out the best in your quarterback, because the interior pass protection has just not been there. It's a fact. So I think there's ways to improve this offense and you get it even more explosive than what Mike Zimmer saw this year. But you're right, Judd. This was, the quintessential, this is what I want to do offensively. And you just wait. When my defense is back at the level that it's been the last few years and we're playing this level of offense, watch out. I mean, that's the mindset that he's sending to all of us, that give my defense time to get back. We had all these injuries and, all this other stuff that happened to us out of our control, but when that unit is playing the way it did in 2017, we can play this methodical, conservative style on offense with, and be as explosive as we want. And we're going to be a Super Bowl team. Like, that's kind of what he's alluding to there. And whether that's true or not, is going to depend on the offensive coordinator, and B, depend on what the scheme actually looks like, and if they really don't make any changes, if that's kind of the way he wants to go with it. Because he said the exact same thing the day after the San Francisco 49ers game in the division playoffs last year. He did not want any changes to this offense. He loved the scheme. Said the exact same thing this year. So I don't anticipate it being any different. So you're going to have a smaller pool of candidates to go through because, like Judd said, if you're a young, up-and-coming offensive mind, you're not going to want to be forced into running a scheme that you don't see fit, that like you don't, you should be getting Justin Jefferson, a lot more involved than he was this year. But even Kurt kind of pumped the brakes on that on Sunday. If you'll remember his quote saying that, this is a run first offense and, Justin has to be patient in that, and that he was, and he showed up when he needed to. But to me, that wasn't just, Kurt complimenting the rookie wide receiver in all his, record breaking accomplishments. It's a tale of caution of, if you think this is going to become like a regular thing, or if you think that we're going to be targeting you, double digit figures every single game, just, slow your roll on that. That to me was a warning sign more than just, complimentary of him being ready when they needed him to be.
Yeah. I think so. And by the way, the only on the list of candidates that The Athletic put out, and I'm sure Courtney has more information on these, the only quote unquote young up and coming offensive mind on here is Clint Kubiak, who's like Rick Dennison is 62, longtime Kubiak associate. But like to your points about the offense, you look on paper and you say, wow, they were fourth in total yards. PFF had them ranked all season as one of the best overall offenses in the NFL. And when things are going well, when they get out to a lead, and when Dalvin is getting going, and Kirk can work off play action. By the way, Kirk Cousins, here's some nuggets for you on a Nerd Stat Tuesday. Cousins on play action, fourth in the NFL among quarterbacks with a 122 passer rating, second in the NFL and with 18 play action touchdowns, and fourth in the NFL with 9.6 yards per attempt. And so, like, we know that when they run the ball and they run off play action, or they throw off play action, that the offense is excellent. My problem is, to win a Super Bowl, you need more than one formula to beat some of these great teams. Like when you're like, if you want to boil this down next year and you're into the playoffs and it's divisional round, conference round, and you're playing the Saints, eventually you might have to play the Chiefs. If you want to win a Super Bowl, you might have to play the Chiefs. You might fall behind. And the problem is the Vikings are so bad at pass protection, and Kirk is not nearly as good when he's not reliant on play action. All of a sudden, the formula that works well goes away in some of these games. And so I think whatever it looks like, I'm not saying overhaul the whole system, but they have to be better in other dimensions when things aren't perfectly set up for them offensively. And that's my biggest issue. Kirk's part of that. The offensive line is probably the biggest part of that. And in some cases, scheme. I mean, Courtney, they run the ball 89% of the time on 2nd and 1 and 2nd and 2. So like in the instances where you could take a shot or you could get a big explosive play, they're still very much, we just need 1 yard for a first down. Let's be conservative. And so they have to break out from some of this stuff.
They need to stop being as predictable as they are. And you bring up 2nd down. They have the highest design run percentage on 2nd down, whether that's 2nd and short, 2nd and long, whatever. That has to change. Like that's not up for debate. That has to change because teams are going to figure you out. Like that's all the NFL is adapting to what trends are happening and what your opponent's doing, and knowing what your opponent's going to do before they even do it. So you have to change. You can't tell me that that's something that's acceptable going into next year. Like, in running on 2nd down is we've talked about this. It's one of like the dumbest things to do offensively if you're doing it repeatedly. Like, and the fact of the matter is, you have two really good wide receivers in Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Thielen's probably got a couple more years left where he's playing at this level. Don't waste that. Don't waste Justin Jefferson's early years. I mean, the fact that the guy had 1,400 receiving yards effectively in 14 games is wild. And I asked him about that after the game, being like, hey, do you ever just kind of sit back and consider, like, yeah, they didn't use me till week 3. Imagine where you would have been had they, taken the training wheels off from the start and, opened up the playbook with Jefferson against Green Bay and the Colts in week 1 and 2. And he said, yeah, like it's, that's something that he's legitimately thought about. So, I'm not saying that Justin Jefferson's going to come in here with the mindset of demanding the ball, but he should in 2021. He should demand the ball. Dalvin Cook, is going to get his run. Absolutely. I mean, he was a terrific running back. He was in the MVP consideration this year. There's a reason that this offense worked as well as it did. It had three chess pieces with Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook, and Justin Jefferson. But to be so reliant on forcing things through Cook when you know that you can pass to set up the run. I know that sounds like a Football Outsiders antonym or whatever, like that just doesn't make any sense to some people, but you can do that in the NFL. You can pass on first and second down. You don't always have to run to set up the pass. Why don't they try it that way? See if it works. I mean, because I guarantee it will.
Like that in the heart of the Adrian Peterson era, the most team success they had is when they passed to set up the run in 2009. Like at the outset, it was an Adrian Peterson show.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's amazing how in the NFL, like some people bring up these stats about, well, when teams run the ball for this many yards or this many times and their record is amazing, right? It's like, well, yeah, but did they build the lead by jamming the run in the first and second quarters, or did they get the lead by throwing the ball and then they ran the ball for 100 yards in the second half because they were milking clock? And sometimes it feels like the Vikings' only approach is, in order for us to win, we must run the ball 70% of the time. And I think they run the ball statistically over 60% of the time in the first quarter because we must establish the run. And I told these guys the other week, when Dalvin Cook is active, your run is established. So like you don't have to run 15 times in the first quarter to prove it. Like you can still throw. It's okay. Score more than 8 points in the first half once in a while, I guess would be my advice.
I mean, get off to a faster start and don't play from behind. And when you're playing from behind, don't start out by running to try to even out the score because you're going to kill the clock on yourself, which they've done, and then don't go to panic mode with, the influx of targets for your wide receivers and your tight ends at critical moments. Like if you establish that earlier, if you get off to a faster start, you won't be kind of in this time crunch you put yourself in the third and fourth quarter to try to win games. So I think, wrapping that in a bow, they had an explosive offense this year. Absolutely. Can they be better? Sure. Like they're not the most explosive offense in the NFL, and anybody that tries to tell you that is wrong. There are a lot of flaws, I think. I mean, the scheme, as I said, it's not broken, but there are flaws that you can point out and be like, hey, what if we did this differently next year? Tried it. And if it doesn't work, deviate to something else. Like it just doesn't make a whole ton of sense to be like, we're going to run this back for a third straight year, no changes, same scheme. Because really, if you're doing that, then Clint Kubiak's probably your best option. I mean, he's a young guy. I don't know if he has the chops yet to be a play caller in the NFL, but he's been working under his father and this group of Rick Dennison, Brian Periani, Clint Kubiak. They've kind of been this little traveling group with Gary Kubiak wherever he's been. He would have the support staff around him in order to do this, to put him in the position if he wants to be a play caller in the NFL, that he could do it effectively and know that he has people to lean on. But, if you're going outside, you're going to be looking at candidates and making sure that, hey, this is what we ran here in Minnesota in 2020. I hope your game plan for what you want to do as a coach mirrors this, because if it doesn't, you're going to be running into some issues.
And if Clint gets the job, my guess is that Gary might agree to come back again as an offensive advisor and assistant head coach, and around we go. Exactly right. So the real key here, because I think we all agree, as long as Zim is here, fundamentally the offense is not going to change much from this. Like we can talk about what they should do, and we're probably right, but we don't run the team. And Zim is going to say, but I love to pound the football up the middle in the A gap. So my question to you pivots to the defense, which now becomes the most important thing. I feel like the talk, and it's partially set up by Zimmer, starting with Courtney with the post game against the Saints. The talk now is, well, when all my guys come back, we're fine. I get Kendricks back. I get Barr back. I Pierce opts back into football. Hunter comes back. An assumption that might be dangerous, but he's going to assume.
1,000%.
So as a person who's around the team and talks to a lot of people involved with the team and watches the team on a daily basis, tell me this. Is that a safe assumption, or is that fraught with problems? Because assumptions in football of everyone's coming back to me are often far more dangerous than they are precise, than accurate.
100%. Like, I think the frustrating part of this season for someone who covers the team is that all off season, pointing out the what they were doing, going all in certain aspects and then taking a step back in other aspects. Like, they misjudged the offseason. They miscalculated it. I've been saying it. Other people on the beat have been saying it. But we were told all throughout the season, no, you're wrong. Like, that's not accurate, blah, blah, blah. Like, lost 9 players from the defense in 2019. We'll be fine. Today, Mike Zimmer says, yeah, I probably miscalculated some things. I was always told die with a lie. So, I mean, that's, whatever. But, then he goes on to list everything that I have been saying that everybody else has been saying since March of 2020. You lost Everson Griffin. You lost Mackenzie Alexander, Linville Joseph, Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, and all the guys that you had that weren't starters that were a part of this scheme for a number of years. Andrew Sendejo, Stephen Weatherly, Marcus Sherrills even. A lot of guys. So it just kind of felt like a little too convenient with the timing on that. But then it's like, well, we're going to be a much better defense when Pierce comes back, opts back in, when we get Danielle Hunter back, when we get Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr back. Like, let's just discuss and establish one thing first. Eric Kendricks missed 5 games. Stop acting like he missed the whole season. He missed 5 games. That's big difference between 5 and 16. And then you have 2 guys coming off season-ending injuries. One that you completely misjudged because you brought in Unique Ngakoue thinking, okay, well, Hunter's going to be back at some point. It's going to be great. Like, you clearly misjudged that injury because otherwise you wouldn't have made that move, because if you knew that Ngakoue was going to be out there by himself, it'd be idiotic. You would never have made that move because he's a one-dimensional pass rusher. So Zimmer said today that he's, encouraged about where Hunter is right now in his progress coming back. That he thinks he's going to be an even better player than he was before the injury, which could very well be true. But we just don't know yet. And I think that it's a really hard thing to assume that, if we get all these pieces back, we're going to be that much better. How can you guarantee that, especially the fact that 2 guys are coming off of season-ending injuries and have never dealt with these injuries before? Like, Danielle Hunter had a neck injury. It's not a foot. It's not an ankle. It's not a knee. It's a neck injury. And you play a position where you have to bend. You're going to be facing double teams. Like, okay, like to assume that he's going to be straight and he'll be just, whatever, come back. I mean, yeah, he's going to be 27 years old next season, at the end of next season. So he'll start the year at 26. He'll be fine, probably, but can we guarantee that? I don't think it's just as simple as saying, oh, Pro Bowl defensive end on one side. And also, that doesn't fix the other issues that you have. You need pass rushers. I asked him about that specifically. You need a 3-technique defensive tackle because you did not generate any interior push this year. And you didn't have the guys that you could throw in there on the inside, what you did with Stephen Weatherly last year. Brian Robeson played that role. You didn't have that this year. Why? Because your backups were forced into starters' roles, and then you didn't have any backups behind them. So these guys were doing the best that they could, but it wasn't good enough. So even if Danielle Hunter comes back, and even if Michael Pierce is there at nose tackle, you've got your 3-technique spot. You also have the other defensive end spot. You have to upgrade both of those spots in order for this defensive line to be worth its salt in 2021, because you're going to be asking a lot of Danielle Hunter, who we anticipated with Everson Griffin leaving, being on the receiving end of double teams. And it'd be harder for him to do what he did the past 2 seasons with 14.5 sacks by just, being out there by himself. So that's something that I think they're really going to have to focus on in free agency. The cap's coming down. They're over the cap right now. They can fix that. There's ways to do it. Cut Rudolph. If you really don't want, figure out where Cleveland's playing, because then that's going to determine what you do with Reef. There's ways to make it work, but I think that you really got to prioritize defensive linemen first and foremost in free agency in the draft.
The Reef thing is becoming really interesting. I mean, a year ago it was like, all right, well, he might even just get cut, and almost did before last season, and then then they'll just kind of be done with Riley Reef because he's in his early 30s, but he's still a league average offensive tackle. Mm-hmm. And like right now the Vikings have an above average tackle in Brian O'Neill, and according to PFF, around an average left tackle, which is not something to just dismiss in Riley Reef. And then 3 huge question marks in the middle. And while they try to figure out what those 3 question marks are going to turn into, if you also jettison Riley Reef, And now his cap number is like 13.5 next year. So I don't think you can do that because you have to free up money for all the defensive things you're saying too. So I guess what I'm saying is I think it's actually more likely that they give Riley Reiff a fairly cap friendly, like 2-year extension or something, and smooth that cap number out so that they at least have some stability at the tackle positions and then go forward with some of these others. Like at first it was like, oh, they're going to free up $13 million next year. I don't know if that's the case. I don't think it's going to be 13. It might be more like 9 or 10, but I don't think you can just get rid of him.
No, I don't either. And I wrote that in kind of my off-season checklist. How do you fix the offensive line? I write this every year. Just copy and paste.
Yeah.
But
so
to me, the key cog
Change the name, Courtney.
is pretty much the thing that you have to do first. Figure out where Ezra Cleveland's going to play. If you say, okay, he was good enough at right guard, but we don't want to keep him there. We want to see him at left tackle. We draft him to be a left tackle. Move him out to left tackle. You free up 11 million something on the cap, and then you're focused on finding guards either in free agency or the draft. But if you keep him at right guard, like the reason that he is so important and he's kind of the first domino that has to fall, because then that can determine what you're going to do with Reiff. And I'm with you, Phil. I think that you either convert his salary for 2021 into a signing bonus, prorated, or give him like a 2-year extension. He bounced back this year in a big way, and he's played some really good football, probably the best that we've seen in this recent stretch that he's been in Minnesota ever since he came here from Detroit a couple of years ago. So I think they would be wise to do that because Reiff was a really good left tackle for them throughout most of the season. O'Neill's your future. At right tackle, you're going to probably talk extension with him at some point. And then if you really like Cleveland, if you think, hey, this guy has a high ceiling, let's keep him at right guard for now, see how that works. Then you're really focusing on the left guard spot. And I think personally, I'm of the belief now, go into free agency, find somebody else. That's, certainly an upgrade from where Dakota Dozier was at left guard. But, this team has also proven to us.
I think we lost Courtney there. Here, we'll pop her into the waiting room there.
You're good.
But the main point about Riley Reiff, like a year ago, it was a foregone conclusion. He's just gone. Would you risk putting Ezra Cleveland as your starting left tackle in a win now season with a non-mobile quarterback and then opening up basically 3 job searches in those guard and center spots? Like,
I prefer
that's
not.
a huge risk.
I prefer not to, but the question also becomes, is Reiff going to be willing to restructure and do you favors after you literally screwed him before the 2020 season started?
But you're not restructuring. You'd be giving him an extension. Like it would be, listen.
But I'm just saying Reiff had a good enough year and he plays a premium position where I would not do the Vikings a favor.
Yeah.
So unless they came to me and said, we are going to reward you, because they literally said, okay, take what we're offering or go out and find a job. And the season, if I recall correctly, was like 5 days from starting. Yeah. That's a really tough thing to accept.
If you rally, so right now, like he's nowhere near the top of the list of left tackles, but
he got a job.
But Bakhtiari and Laramie Tunsil both make $22-23 million a year. The average starting left tackle in the NFL makes around 10 or 11, $12 million, and he took a cut down to 8 last year.
Yep.
So, but the thing is, he's only guaranteed, I think, like maybe a couple $1 million or something next year. So you could say, listen, you're only guaranteed 2. Forget about your cap number. We'll guarantee you 10 on a 2-year deal or something.
I think he's due, I believe he's due, if I'm correct about the figure, $5 million 3 days after the league year starts in March. So that's going to be the payment that tells us. If they make that payment, he's staying.
Yeah.
If they don't, but I need to know, is the cap coming down to 180, 175? I believe, so it was if I'm not mistaken, it was at 198.2 million for this year. And I've read reports of late that it's probably just going to go down to like 195.
Yeah, it's not going to be the 175.
So if that's the case, I can do some things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so. But you're going to be squeezed a little bit. Luckily for the Vikings, they've got one of the best capologists in the entire league. Real quick here, because I don't think we've gone through this full. Like we've mentioned a lot of these names, but just to fly through this here, in terms of offensive coordinator candidates to replace Gary Kubiak, this would be the 6th offensive coordinator in 6 seasons. By the way, one was fired, Flip. Another one resigned.
Shermer left. Stefanski left. Turner resigned.
Turner resigned. A couple got hired as head coaches.
Yep.
So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yep.
But Clint Kubiak, 33 years old. He's the Vikings quarterback coach.
If Gary agrees to stick around and he goes back to an offensive advisor role and Clint becomes the OC, I think Zimmer would say yes for sure.
Yeah. And I think like really, and we'll get Courtney back in here too. On the Clint Kubiak front, let me go through these quick and then I have a couple questions for Courtney. I think it depends entirely too on his relationship with Cousins. Like if those guys have a great tight bond and they have chemistry, it makes even more sense. Rick Dennison, 62 years old, football lifer. Now he's been the Vikings offensive line coach and run game coordinator. He's been an offensive coordinator in Denver and Houston before. He basically just follows Gary Kubiak around. Anthony Lynn is a name that pops up. 52 years old, just got fired by the Chargers. He actually has very little coordinator experience in his career. He's mostly been a running backs coach and a head coach. He loves to run, which Mike Zimmer loves. The Chargers were a top 10 rushing attempts team this year, despite averaging only 3.8 yards per carry. Pound that rock. And trailing in most games. But rookie quarterback, want to protect him, run the ball. Hugh Jackson is out there. He has a Cincinnati connection with Mike Zimmer. He's been out of football for a couple of years in terms of like day-to-day coaching. Problem is, I think, like if you look at his resume, now it was with Cleveland and the Raiders at their worst. He just took a couple of really tough jobs.
I think he's too toxic.
But like his offenses have been terrible throughout the years as a coordinator and head coach. Jay Gruden is kind of interesting because him and Zimmer have a connection from Cincinnati. Cousins is really Jay Gruden opened the door and said, RG3, you're not my guy anymore. Kirk Cousins, you're the starting quarterback. He also developed Andy Dalton. Dan Campbell's interesting because he has big muscles and barbed wire tattoos. And then Ken Zampese is the quarterback's coach for Washington.
Didn't Gruden rip Cousins on the way out the door, though? Didn't Gruden take a shot at Cousins?
He did.
Yeah,
talking about like
Kirk, no. Kirk's not going to like that.
That was at the end of that 7-9 season.
We do not want to hurt feelings here.
So actually, like of all these guys, like if Jay Gruden and Kirk Cousins had a good relationship, I think that'd be the one that I would look at. But Clint Kubiak is actually the one on here. All right, he's young. He probably has ideas that he wants to implement. And I think my question to you, Courtney, would be, I see him and Cousins chirping at each other sometimes on the sidelines, but like that's heat of the moment. I'm assuming they have a good relationship. Like what is the relationship and the trust level there with Clint Kubiak?
You know, I mean, that's his quarterback's coach. That's the voice that he hears, most often. If it's not Gary, it's Clint. And I think that, I don't know if Gary and Clint ever got to the level that Norvin Scott Turner were here a couple of years ago, and in the way that they would facilitate between the two of them and then relay the play to the quarterback, all of that. But I do know that, Clint's been kind of earning his stripes in this, and he's had his father to learn under, and he's been, a number of different places. And is he ready for the job? I'm not sure. But when you talk about continuity, and Kirk, had mentioned that it's not that often in his career that he's ever had the same voice in his headset from year to year. And I don't buy that excuse completely as like I don't think you can blame that for anything. Like, oh, he struggled this year because he had, a different offensive coordinator, all of that. Like, certainly what Zimmer said is right. You want to do what your quarterback is the best at, for sure. I believe that. But just because it's a different person calling the plays, I don't know if that's going to really change things all that much. How the information's relayed, certainly important, but Clint will be insulated. If he gets that job, he will be insulated with, I kind of think that Judd's onto something there. Like, maybe Gary Kubiak comes back in that senior offensive advisor, assistant head coach role that he had before, to be able to make sure that this offense can survive without him, and also giving somebody who's incredibly green. Clint Kubiak's a quieter, shyer guy. I mean, in speaking with us, he doesn't talk to us all that much, but, he'll be learning kind of on the fly too. And it's just a matter of, does Kirk need more support than Clint can provide? That's what the Vikings need to figure out in this offseason, if that's the direction that they're going to go, so they don't have to take a step back offensively, that they can only take a step forward and build on that. But the name Dan Campbell, I think his name came up. It's either him or Sean Ryan when Sean was the quarterback's coach in New Orleans. Their names came up when John DeFilippo was hired in that process. So that's not surprising to me. Hugh Jackson, I remember for a hot second was kind of in the mix, and then Zimmer squashed that rumor allegedly back in January of 2019 when they named Stefanski. They took the interim tag away from him. And then, Anthony Lynn would be an interesting one just because they both have the Parcells connection. And he just got, fired from the Chargers. And like you said, Phil, they ran the ball a lot. So that could be interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing that one here. But it's honestly going to depend who's willing to play by Zimmer's rules and run the offense that he wants to run. That's so important.
Yep.
So if I had a football stove, Courtney, and I was turning it up and down, what should the heat dial going into training camp of 2021 be on the head coach and GM?
If it's like mine, where it goes up to level 8, that's the highest, and that's there's the center burner, and then there's the big burner. So you turn it up to 8, it's going to get all of them. So put Rick and Zimmer in both of those. So we can kind of address this in one turn of the dial. I would say I'd probably put it at like a 6, because we knew this year, when we're talking about miscalculating the offseason last year, and most of us who are here and do our job said they probably miscalculated the offseason, that in doing so, winning in 2020 is gravy. If you win, awesome, but you are set up to compete in 2021. So do that. But I just think that the way that things went this year and all of the stuff that went wrong, yes, some of it was out of their control, but you are only as good as the players that you have. But it took them a while to adjust to certain things. So I'd say the patience level, from ownership, from other factors will factor into him entering the season on the hot seat. Both him and Spielman. It's going to depend how they do in the draft again this year. I mean, sure, in retrospect, we look at 2020 and say that wasn't a great draft class outside of a few pieces, but you had 15 picks. Like, that's the thing I don't get. If you have that many picks, and you say you want to take the most bites out of the apple, whatever. This year you have 11 so far, and you'll probably end up having more knowing who the general manager is. Why not try to trade up and get a better draft pick instead of having a bunch of 6th and 7th rounders that are either on your practice squad or long gone? Like, that's what I think you really need to focus on. So that's what we should be judging Spielman on. And then Zimmer will be judged on, okay, you said Dantzler and Gladney this season was necessary for them to enter next year ready to go. Are they ready to go? Is your defensive line going to be back to where it was, or at least like nearing the level of where it was, where it actually generated a pass rush a few years ago? All of those things are very, very important. So that's why I think that we're going to be looking at Zimmer more closely under a microscope. I'm not saying that like he loses, it's that hot where he loses a couple games and, he's gone by the 4th week of the season. Not at all. But, they have to bounce back in 2020, because he's also set the precedent here himself that it's 1 year in, 1 year out, 1 year in, 1 year out with the playoffs. Like, you can't regress 2 years in a row of this. If it's another 7-9 season, then I don't think he'll be here in a year.
Yep. That's Courtney Cronin, everybody. She is a wonderful Vikings reporter for ESPN.com and a friend of the show. And we appreciate all your insight throughout the year. And we'll definitely have you on pretty regularly throughout the offseason too. But thank you, and enjoy like a 5-minute break and then into all sorts of speculation at some point leading into combine draft, etc.
Special teams coordinator, get the scoop. We all care deeply.
Looking forward to it.
Talk to you.
All right. See you, Courtney. That's a wrap on this episode of Purple Daily. Please click the subscribe button on our YouTube channel if you could. And also, if you could give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple, if you listen there, that'd be great too. ScoreNorth.com for all of Judd's Vikings articles. And we'll see you guys tomorrow for the first edition of Vikings Write That Down.